I remember the moment as if it were frozen in time, a grotesque still frame that even now makes my stomach twist. The morning sun filtered through the curtains on the day of my son's wedding, and for a few seconds I felt the ordinary thrill of a mother about to see her only child walk into a new life. I had spent weeks pretending to be fine, rehearsing the smile I wanted to wear that day, the smile that said I was proud, the smile that said no matter how much my daughter-in-law resented me, I would not ruin their celebration. But then I looked in the mirror, and the woman who stared back at me was not the woman I had seen the night before. My breath caught my hand trembling as I touched my face. My eyebrows were gone. Not thin, not plucked, not shaved neatly like a style choice. Gone. Erased as if someone had decided I no longer deserved a face, only a mask. My skin was raw in places where the razor had pressed too hard, leaving tiny scratches that burned when I ran my finger across them. It was the most humiliating thing I had ever seen reflected in a mirror. I stumbled backward, clutching the edge of the dresser. I whispered out loud, as if confessing to the empty room, "What happened? What did they do to me?" And then, as if the cruelty wasn't enough, my phone buzzed. A message appeared glowing on the screen, words that seared into me like acid. "Now your face finally matches your age." It was from my daughter-in-law. My future daughter-in-law. The woman who was supposed to become family today had made sure that the one face the guests would remember, the one face photographed in every corner, would be mine without eyebrows, grotesque, a living spectacle. I felt my knees weaken and I sat down on the bed, the phone still in my hand. I wanted to scream, but instead a dry laugh escaped me. "So this is it," I whispered. "This is how they plan to erase me." All I could think about was the 100 pairs of eyes that would turn toward me during the ceremony, the whispers, the snickers, the way my son would look at me embarrassed, maybe even ashamed. I knew Sarah hated me, but I had not imagined she would go this far. I remembered every little comment she had made in the months leading up to the wedding, how she suggested that maybe I shouldn't be in too many photos, because, Mom, the focus should be on us. How she gently hinted I might want to sit in the back during the ceremony because, the front row is for important people. They had seemed like small slights at the time, the kind you shrug off for the sake of peace, but now staring at my bare face in the mirror, they formed a chain and I was trapped at the end of it. What do you do when the person who should have welcomed you into her life decides instead to erase you from her story? What do you do when humiliation becomes the weapon of choice inside your own family? I know what you're thinking. Watching me, listening to me confess this. Some of you are asking, why didn't I walk away? Why didn't I storm into my son's room and demand justice? The answer is simple. I froze. I froze like a deer staring down the headlights of a car, powerless to move, powerless to save itself. Because sometimes betrayal doesn't just cut your skin, it paralyzes your soul. I sat there for a long time staring at my reflection until the corners of my lips curled into a bitter smile. They thought this would destroy me. They thought I would be too ashamed to even show my face at the wedding. Maybe they even hoped I would vanish quietly so they could continue their perfect day without the burden of my presence. But what Sarah didn't know, what my son didn't know, what not a single one of the guests would guess, was that I had been preparing for this day for months. You see, cruelty has a way of teaching you patience. Every insult, every dismissal, every forced smile, while they pushed me into the corner of their lives, had taught me how to wait, how to plan, how to hide my truth until the moment it mattered most. And today, standing there in front of that mirror with no eyebrows and a face stripped bare, I realized this was the perfect stage for the performance I had prepared. I opened the drawer of my nightstand and took out the small golden envelope I had hidden there. My hands no longer trembled as I held it. Inside were the words that would turn the entire wedding upside down, the words I had written in my own hand late at night when the pain of their mockery became unbearable. It was a letter to my son, but not just to him. It was a letter meant to be heard by everyone who thought I was a weak old woman, too desperate for love to fight back. It was a letter that carried every sacrifice, every humiliation, every secret truth I had swallowed in silence. And I had sworn to myself that if the day ever came when they crossed the final line, I would let the world hear it. That day had arrived. My humiliation was their opening act, but my truth would be the finale. I want you to imagine this with me. Imagine walking into a room full of people you know are ready to laugh at you. Imagine carrying the secret knowledge that every smile they wear, every drink they toast, every flower in the centerpiece on the table exists because of you, because of your sacrifice. Imagine being the invisible hand that built the stage while they stole the spotlight. That was me. And now they had stripped my face of the last thing that marked me human, thinking I would crawl into the shadows. But I had a secret that would drag them into the light. I looked at my reflection one last time before leaving the room. Without eyebrows, I looked different. Yes, I looked older. Yes, but I also looked fierce. My eyes, no longer framed by hair, seemed sharper, more piercing, as if daring anyone to look away. I whispered to myself, "Let them laugh. Let them laugh until I read the letter. Then let's see who has the last word." So I walked out, my head high, the golden envelope tucked into my purse, my face bare but my spirit aflame. I could already hear the murmur of voices downstairs, glasses clinking, music playing. I could already picture Sarah adjusting her dress, smirking, believing she had won. But deep inside, I carried the calm certainty of a storm about to break. They had no idea who I really was. They had no idea what I was capable of. They thought they had shaved away my dignity, but what they had really done was hand me the perfect mask for my revenge. And so I ask you, watching, listening, judging me from your own seat, what would you have done? Would you have walked away in shame, hiding your face from the world? Or would you have walked into that room ready to burn the whole lie to the ground? Comment the number 1 if you believe I should have stood tall and fought back and hit, like if you think silence would have been safer. Because this is not just my story. This is every mother's story who has ever been pushed aside, humiliated, erased. And today my story begins not with eyebrows, not with beauty, but with truth. When I tell you that the signs were always there, I am not exaggerating. Looking back now, the first cut was not the razor that stole my eyebrows, but the quiet little comments that slid under my skin months before the wedding. The blade was words, not steel, and it shaved off my dignity one layer at a time. At first, I wanted to believe it was nothing. I wanted to believe Sarah was just nervous, overwhelmed by the stress of planning a big event. Every bride gets sharp when the pressure mounts right. That's what I told myself when she began hinting that I should maybe tone down my look for the ceremony. I remember the way she said it. Her lips pulled into a polite smile that never reached her eyes. "You know, Mom." She began using that word like a weapon, like she was trying it on to see how it fit. "The photos are going to last forever, and I think it might be best if you keep your outfit simple, nothing too distracting." Distracting. That was the word she used, as if my presence alone could ruin her perfect frame. I laughed it off, though something inside me tightened. I nodded, saying, of course I didn't want to overshadow her. But who was I kidding? Overshadow her, I was a 62-year-old woman with thinning hair and lines around my mouth, carved from years of labor and sacrifice. She was a glowing bride with a white dress and the world at her feet. How could I possibly overshadow her? Yet the message was clear. Don't shine. Don't stand out. Don't even try. Then came the second cut. We were standing in the bridal shop, surrounded by satin and lace Sarah, flipping through hangers while my son trailed behind her, carrying her purse like a servant. She turned to me, holding up a shimmering gown, and smiled. "Isn't this stunning? I can't wait to see the photos." Then, as if an afterthought, she added, "Oh, by the way, we've been thinking about the seating arrangements. The front row is for immediate family, but with the photographers and everything, maybe it's better if you sit 2 rows back. You'll still see everything. We just want the pictures to look clean. Clean. She wanted her wedding pictures to be clean of me. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling in my little house, wondering if I was reading too much into it. Maybe she really just wanted a perfect shot. Maybe I was being paranoid. But my heart whispered the truth. This was the beginning of something bigger, something darker. I could feel it the way a storm builds long before the clouds arrive. The next weekend, during a family dinner, she poured me a glass of water and leaned down her breath, warm against my ear. You should really consider some makeup for the ceremony, maybe even a wig. Cameras are so unforgiving at your age. She said it sweetly, her tone dripping with false concern, but I caught the smirk hiding behind it. My son was too busy laughing with his friends to notice. Or maybe he noticed and chose to ignore it. Sometimes betrayal is not only in action, but in silence. The first real wound came when she hosted her bridal shower. She invited me, of course, because what would people say if she hadn't? But when I arrived with my modest little gift wrapped in plain paper, I was met with the coldest of receptions. The room was filled with her friends, all polished and glossy, their eyebrows arched to perfection, their lips swollen with injections. I could feel their eyes slide over me like I was some antique relic that had wandered into their gallery. And then Sarah, my soon-to-be daughter-in-law, announced loudly for all to hear, "This is my future mother-in-law." Isn't she brave? She's been through so much living alone, managing with so little. We try to help her when we can, don't we, Evan? My son nodded, distracted, sipping champagne. My cheeks burned not from pride, but from humiliation. I realized in that moment that she didn't see me as family. She saw me as a prop, a story to entertain her friends, the poor old woman to make herself look more generous. I drove home that night in silence, the road stretching before me like a tunnel, headlights slicing the darkness. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. The humiliation burned deeper than any wound. I whispered to myself, why are they doing this? Why is she trying to erase me? And somewhere in the hollow of my chest, a small ember of anger began to glow. The next day, I found myself replaying her words in my mind, obsessing over every syllable. Distracting, clean, unforgiving, brave. They were small words, but they were knives, each one cutting away at the fragile bond between us. And I started to realize that Sarah wasn't careless. No, she was deliberate. She was testing me, pushing me, measuring how much I would endure. Each remark was a rehearsal, each humiliation a dress rehearsal for the main act that was still to come. I wish I could tell you I fought back then, that I raised my voice and defended my dignity. But the truth is, I stayed silent, because silence at the time felt safer. Silence felt like survival. I told myself, it's just words, it's just comments. Don't ruin the wedding. Don't ruin your son's happiness. That's what they want mothers to believe, isn't it? That our pain is less important than their comfort. That we should swallow the insults, smile through the tears, and play our role quietly in the background. But I will tell you, this silence is not peace. Silence is a slow death. And every day I bit my tongue, every day I forced myself to smile, I could feel myself dying a little inside. Until the morning of the wedding, when I looked in the mirror and realized they had taken even my face from me. That was the culmination of all the small cuts, the final slash in a series of wounds I had pretended were harmless. Now looking back at those early signs, I see them for what they were. They weren't coincidences. They weren't slips of the tongue. They were warnings flashing red lights that I ignored. Because sometimes we don't want to believe that the people our children love are capable of cruelty. We don't want to admit that the danger isn't outside our walls, but sitting at our own table. That was the first round of humiliation, the first round of betrayal. It taught me a brutal truth. My daughter-in-law had not just married my son, she had declared war on me. If the first round of humiliation had been sharp words and subtle cuts, the second round revealed something far darker, like a shadow stretching across the floor that suddenly takes the shape of a predator. I had told myself over and over again that Sarah was simply thoughtless, that her remarks were shallow scratches, not deep wounds. But then came the moment when I understood she wasn't just careless. She was calculated. She wasn't stumbling into cruelty. She was building it brick by brick, and I was the wall she meant to tear down. It was a Wednesday afternoon just 2 weeks before the wedding. I had gone into town to buy a simple dress for the rehearsal dinner, something modest, something safe. I was standing in the aisle of a small boutique holding a navy blue dress up to my chest when I heard laughter from the other side of the rack. A woman's voice, bright, sharp, unmistakable. It was Sarah. She hadn't seen me yet, and I froze, my heart racing. She was on the phone speaking to someone, her words loud enough to cut through the quiet music drifting from the shop speakers. "Don't worry," she said, giggling. "She won't ruin anything. Trust me, I've got it all under control. By the time the wedding day arrives, she'll barely be visible. No photos, no speeches, no distractions." Evan agrees. We're on the same page. I held my breath, the dress trembling in my hands. I felt as though the floor had tilted beneath me. She was talking about me. She was planning something to erase me, not just from her life, but from my son's day, from his memory. And then, as if to twist the knife, she added, "Besides, it's not like she has any real pride left. She's so desperate to feel included, she'll swallow anything we do. Honestly, it's pathetic." I couldn't move. My ears rang with the sound of her laughter. For the first time, I saw it clearly. Every insult had been deliberate, every smile a mask, every word rehearsed. She wasn't just cruel. She was orchestrating my disappearance. When she left the store, her heels clicking on the tile, I sank into a chair by the fitting room, the dress crumpled in my lap. My throat burned with unshed tears. But more than tears, something else rose inside me, rage. Not wild, uncontrolled rage, but a steady, focused fire, the kind that smolders quietly until it finds the right fuel. A few days later, my suspicion was confirmed in the most unexpected way. I was walking home from the market when I bumped into an old friend of mine, Clara. We had known each other for decades, though life had carried us in different directions. She was the kind of friend who never meddled, but always noticed, the kind of friend who could see the truth written on your face. She looked at me that day, her eyes narrowing with concern, and asked, "Are you all right? You look diminished." I tried to laugh it off, telling her it was just the stress of the wedding, but Clara didn't buy it. She leaned in, lowered her voice, and whispered, "I overheard Sarah last week at the salon. She was bragging to one of her friends about how she was going to make sure you wouldn't ruin the aesthetic of her wedding. Her words, not mine. She said you were outdated, that she was planning something to make sure all eyes stayed on her." I didn't understand what she meant at the time, but the way she said it, Hattie, it wasn't playful. It was cruel. My stomach dropped, though in truth, I wasn't surprised. Instead, Clara's words felt like confirmation of something I already knew, but had been too afraid to admit. I thanked her, forcing a smile, but when I got home, I locked the door and sat at the kitchen table in silence. I replayed every moment in my mind, piecing together the puzzle. The comments about my looks, the suggestions to stay in the back, the fake concern about makeup and wigs, the conversation I had overheard in the boutique, Clara's warning, together they formed a pattern. Sarah was weaving a trap, and I was the prey caught in it. That night, as I lay awake, I remembered my childhood, remembered my mother's voice telling me, "When people show you who they are, believe them." I had wanted so badly to believe Sarah was just nervous, just unkind in a careless way, but she had shown me exactly who she was, a woman who saw me not as family, but as an obstacle. And obstacles, in her mind, had to be removed. The next morning I noticed another sign, small but unmistakable. The wedding invitations had been printed and mailed weeks earlier, but I saw one lying open on the kitchen counter when I stopped by my son's house. I glanced at it casually until I realized something odd. My name was not there. It mentioned Evan the groom. It mentioned Sarah the bride. It even listed both sets of parents except for me. Instead, it simply said, "The family of Evan and Sarah requests the honor of your presence." My son's father had been gone for years, and I was the only parent he had left. And yet my name had been erased, not even a mention, as if I didn't exist. My chest tightened, and I had to turn away before anyone noticed the tears pooling in my eyes. I walked out of that house with a new understanding. This wasn't a series of accidents. This was war. Sarah wanted me gone, not just from her wedding, not just from her photos, but from my son's narrative, from the story of his life. She wanted me to be a ghost, a shadow flickering at the edge of their happiness. And my son, whether through weakness or complicity, was letting her do it. That was the second round of escalation, and it was worse than the first, because the first had been words I could pretend didn't matter, but the second was proof. Proof overheard in a boutique. Proof whispered by an old friend. Proof printed in black and white ink on an invitation where my name should have been. And proof, once you see it, cannot be unseen. I tell you this because you need to understand how betrayal builds. It doesn't always come crashing in like a wave. Sometimes it arrives in drops, small at first, then faster until you're drowning, and you didn't even realize the water was rising. By the time I recognized it, I was already gasping for air, and yet even then I said nothing. Because I knew deep in my bones that if I confronted her too soon, if I revealed that I had seen through her mask, she would only find another way to strike. I told myself I had to wait. I had to endure. I had to bide my time. But inside, the ember of rage had grown hotter, glowing brighter, and I knew one day soon it would ignite into flames. The third round came the night before the wedding, and it was the one that nearly broke me. By then, I already suspected Sarah had something planned. I had heard her words in the boutique. I had felt the sting of her insults. I had seen my name vanish from the invitation. But nothing prepared me for what she actually did. Betrayal is cruel enough when it is spoken, but when it becomes action, when it leaves a mark on your body, it turns into something else entirely. It becomes unforgettable. It was late on Friday evening when I arrived at their house. Sarah had insisted that I stay over so I could be with the family on the morning of the wedding. Part of me wanted to refuse to retreat into the safety of my own home, but my son looked at me with pleading eyes. "Please, Mom," he said softly. "Sarah wants this to feel like family. It means a lot to her." His words cut, not because of what he said, but because of what he didn't. He didn't notice my hesitation. He didn't see the dread already etched on my face. He only saw Sarah's version of reality, not mine. And so I agreed, though every instinct screamed at me to turn around and leave. Dinner that night was almost theatrical. Sarah flitted about the kitchen like a hostess on stage, serving wine, arranging plates, smiling too brightly. At one point, she brought me a tall glass of orange juice. "You shouldn't drink wine tonight," she said sweetly, pressing the glass into my hands. "It'll help you sleep and you'll feel refreshed for tomorrow." I hesitated for a moment, staring into the glass, the liquid thick and golden, but my son nudged me gently. "Go on, Mom. Sarah's trying to take care of you." So I drank because what else could I do? To refuse would have been to accuse, and I had no proof. I told myself it was harmless. I told myself not to be paranoid. But paranoia is often just intuition ignored. I remember nothing after lying down on the guest bed. The next thing I recall is waking up to the sound of birds outside the window, the morning light spilling across the room. I stretched, rubbed my eyes, and stumbled toward the bathroom. When I flicked on the light and looked in the mirror, the scream caught in my throat before I could let it out. My eyebrows were gone, completely gone. Not thinned, not shaped, but shaved, clean off, leaving my face, strange, unfinished alien. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. My hands shot up to my face, my fingers brushing the smooth skin where hair used to be, and I shook my head in disbelief. It felt like a nightmare, but the raw patches of skin told me it was real. I staggered back against the wall, clutching the counter for support. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it in my ears. I wanted to run to my son to demand answers, but I stopped myself. What if he already knew? What if he had allowed it? The thought hollowed me out, left me trembling. My knees buckled and I sank to the floor, pressing my hands to my face. Silent sobs racked my chest, but no tears came. I was too dry, too emptied out. They had taken from me the one thing I could not hide: my face. A knock at the door startled me. Sarah's voice, smooth as silk, floated through the wood. "Everything all right in there? Don't take too long. The photographers will be here soon." My blood ran cold. She knew. Of course she knew. She was savoring it. I forced myself to stand, forced myself to open the door. She stood there, radiant in her silk robe, her hair curled to perfection, her lips painted in gloss. Her eyes flicked to my face, and the tiniest smirk curled at the corner of her mouth. She tilted her head and whispered just loud enough for me to hear, "Now your face finally matches your age." I wanted to slap her. I wanted to scream, but I did nothing. I walked past her, my head down, my fists clenched. My son was downstairs, laughing nervously with his groomsmen. He glanced at me, and for a second, his smile faltered. He saw what had been done to me, and his expression wavered between shock and discomfort. But then he looked away, choosing silence over confrontation. That silence, more than the razor, cut me open, because in that moment I realized he would not defend me, not against her, not even when I had been mutilated for sport. The morning passed in a blur. Guests began to arrive, the house filled with chatter and perfume, and I drifted among them like a ghost. I caught the stares, the suppressed laughter, the whispers behind gloved hands. What happened to her? Did she forget to put on makeup? She looked strange. Each comment was another stone on my chest, pressing me deeper into the ground. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to vanish before the ceremony, but I couldn't. Because this was my son's wedding, and no matter how much they tried to erase me, I was still his mother. By midday, I was isolated completely. Sarah made sure of it. She kept me away from the bridesmaids, away from the family photos, away from the laughter. At one point, I found myself alone in the kitchen, clutching a cup of coffee I couldn't drink, staring at the tiled floor. I felt hollow, invisible, humiliated beyond words. My chest ached with the weight of it. For a brief moment, I considered leaving. I thought about slipping out the back door, driving home, and hiding until it was over. Let them celebrate without me. Let them think they had won. But something stopped me. Something deep. Something stubborn, something that whispered, "If you leave now, they erase you forever. If you walk away, they succeed." I remember leaning against the counter, my reflection caught faintly in the dark glass of the oven door. I looked broken, but I also looked dangerous. And that was when I remembered the golden envelope tucked away in my purse upstairs. My secret, my letter, my truth. I had written it months earlier in a moment of despair, unsure if I would ever be brave enough to use it. But now, with my face stripped bare, with my dignity carved away, I understood why I had written it. This was not just a letter. This was my weapon. And soon, very soon, I would unleash it. Round 3 had brought me to my knees. It had carved humiliation onto my skin. It had silenced my son. It had turned me into a spectacle for strangers. But in doing so, it had also given me clarity. They wanted me to be invisible. They wanted me erased. But I had never been clearer, never been more certain of who I was. And though I felt crushed in that moment, I also knew the storm inside me was building. And when it broke, nothing would ever be the same. The 4th round came with the weight of a hammer, driving every nail of humiliation into my soul until I thought there was nothing left of me to break. By the time I arrived at the reception hall, I was already a ghost walking on fragile bones, stripped of my eyebrows, stripped of my dignity, stripped of my place in my own family. Yet I still clung to a single thread of hope, perhaps once the vows were spoken and the ceremony began. My son would look at me and remember who I was to him. Perhaps despite everything Sarah had done, I would still matter. That fragile hope was the only thing keeping me upright when I walked into the hall. The venue was breathtaking. A ballroom drenched in white roses and chandeliers, golden chairs glimmering under the light. Everywhere I looked, beauty screamed at me. Wealth flaunted itself. Perfection demanded my silence. I could feel the eyes of guests trailing me, their whispers a hiss beneath the music. What happened to her face? Why would she come looking like that? Their words were arrows, but I kept walking my back straight. My chin high, though inside my chest, was caving in. Then came the seating. The front rows were lined with family, Sarah's parents, her cousins, her friends, all polished and perfect. My son guided his bride down the aisle, and I waited for anyone, to point to my seat to remind me that I was the groom's mother, that I had a place of honor. But when the usher approached me, he didn't lead me to the front. Instead, he gestured toward a chair, tucked into the far side near the back corner of the room, half hidden behind a decorative pillar. My breath caught. "There must be some mistake," I whispered. "I'm the groom's mother." But the usher, a young man barely out of school, only shook his head politely. "This is where they asked me to place you, ma'am." For a moment, I stood frozen humiliation crawling over me like fire ants. Guests turned to look, watching the scene unfold, curiosity mingled with disdain. I felt the flush rising in my cheeks, the sting behind my eyes. With trembling hands, I lowered myself into the lonely chair, my view of the altar obscured by the pillar. From where I sat, I couldn't even see my son's face clearly. It was as if I had been erased from his story, tucked away like clutter, hidden from the camera's eye. My chest ached so badly I thought I might collapse right there. The ceremony began. The music swelling vows exchanged laughter echoing through the hall. I tried to focus on my son's voice, tried to hold on to the sound of the boy I had raised, but each time I caught sight of Sarah's triumphant smile, it was like a blade, twisting deeper into me. She knew exactly what she had done. She knew every camera angle would capture her perfect family, while I sat in the shadows, invisible. She turned her head slightly, just enough to meet my eyes, and smirked. That smirk told me everything she believed she had won. She believed I was finished. When the ceremony ended and the guests moved to the banquet tables, the humiliation continued. They placed me at a table near the kitchen doors. The chairs mismatched the linens, slightly stained. I sat with distant relatives I barely knew, while Sarah's family and friends occupied the glittering tables at the center of the room, crystal glasses clinking, laughter rising in waves. Every time a waiter passed the door to the kitchen would swing open and slam shut behind me, a constant reminder that I had been placed out of sight, out of mind. My son walked past me several times, his eyes sliding away, his mouth tight with discomfort. He didn't stop. He didn't speak. He didn't save me. The food arrived plated with delicate precision, but I could barely swallow. The taste turned to ash on my tongue. I stared at the golden envelope tucked into my purse, my fingers itching to pull it out to let the truth spill across the room. But fear held me back. Fear that if I stood, no one would listen. Fear that if I spoke, my son would turn his back on me completely. And so I sat in silence, the laughter around me a cruel soundtrack to my shame. Then came the photographs. The photographer announced it was time for the family portraits. I stood instinctively ready to take my place beside my son, but Sarah's voice cut through the air like a whip. "We'll just do the immediate family for now. Immediate family." The words hung there, heavy, final. I froze, my heart pounding in my ears. The photographer hesitated, looking at me uncertainly, but Sarah waved her hand dismissively. "We'll get some with her later. Right now, we need the important ones." The important ones. As if I were not important. As if I were not the woman who had carried him for 9 months, who had worked 3 jobs to pay his tuition, who had sacrificed every piece of myself so he could stand there in that tuxedo. I felt the tears sting my eyes, but I blinked them back, unwilling to give her the satisfaction of seeing me cry. I stepped back, retreating into the shadows, my place stolen, my identity erased. For the rest of the evening, I wandered like a ghost among the guests, offering tight smiles to those who dared approach, pretending I was fine while my insides crumbled. At one point, I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall of the hall. I barely recognized myself. The missing eyebrows, the forced smile, the dim light clinging to my dress, it was as if I were looking at a stranger, and for the first time in my life, I felt utterly, completely alone. The breaking point came during the speeches. The best man toasted the couple with jokes and fond stories. Sarah's father spoke with tears in his eyes about how proud he was of his daughter. And then my son stood glass in hand, thanking everyone who had made the day possible. He thanked Sarah's parents, he thanked her friends, he even thanked the vendors. But he never mentioned me. Not once. My name was absent, my existence erased from his gratitude. The silence of it was deafening. I felt something inside me crack a deep fracture that would never fully heal. I wanted to scream, to pound the table, to demand recognition, but I sat frozen, my hands gripping the edge of my chair until my knuckles turned white, my vision blurred with unshed tears. I thought, this is it. This is the end of me. They have finally broken me. But then as the applause faded and the music swelled again, my hand brushed against the golden envelope in my purse. I felt the stiff paper beneath my fingers, the weight of it, the promise it carried. And in that moment, something shifted. The despair didn't disappear, but it hardened into something else, something sharper, something unbreakable. I realized then that while they had taken everything from me in that room, my place, my dignity, my face, they had not taken my truth. And soon, very soon, that truth would rise like fire and consume every lie they had built. I sat there in the corner of the glittering hall, my hands trembling as I clutched my purse, and I realized I had reached the edge of myself. I could go no lower. They had stripped me of everything, my eyebrows, my seat, my voice, even my place in my own son's life. And yet somehow I was still breathing. Somehow, I was still sitting upright while humiliation washed over me in endless waves. And in that strange, hollow moment, I discovered a new kind of strength. The strength that comes when you have nothing left to lose. My fingers closed around the golden envelope, its edges sharp against my palm. I had written the letter inside months ago, late at night, sitting alone at my kitchen table. At the time, I wasn't sure if I was writing it for my son, for myself, or for God. I only knew that I needed to put the truth somewhere in ink that could not be erased, in words that could not be twisted. I wrote about the nights I had gone hungry so my child could eat. I wrote about pawning my wedding ring to pay for his textbooks. I wrote about scrubbing office floors until my back screamed just so he could have new shoes when the old ones fell apart. Every sacrifice, every humiliation, every secret pain I had poured it all into that letter. And at the end, I had written the words that now burned in my memory. If you ever forget who I am to you, let this remind you. I am not your burden. I am your mother. And without me, none of this exists. That night, when the ink dried and my hand cramped from writing, I folded the letter, carefully slipped it into the envelope, and told myself I would keep it close. A talisman. A weapon, a reminder that I was more than their cruelty. And now sitting there with the music pounding and the guests laughing, I knew the time had come to use it. This was not just my story anymore. This was a battle between truth and lies, and I was done letting the lies win. I took a deep breath and looked around the room. Everywhere I saw faces, some familiar, some strangers, all of them complicit in my silence. They didn't know the truth. They had been fed a performance, a staged illusion of perfect love and perfect family. And I realized that was my greatest weapon, their ignorance. Because once the truth came out, once they heard my words, nothing would ever look the same again. The stage Sarah had built so carefully would collapse under the weight of reality. My heart pounded as I stood. My knees shook, but I forced them to lock. I pulled the envelope from my purse and felt the room tilt, the chandelier lights blurring for a moment. My instinct screamed at me to sit back down, to disappear, to let them have their victory. But another voice, deeper, fiercer, cut through the fear. It was my mother's voice, the one I had heard as a child, when she told me to stand tall even when the world tried to bend me. When people show you who they are, she had said, believe them, and when you know the truth, never let it die in silence. I walked toward the center of the room, each step heavy but deliberate. Conversations faltered as people noticed me. I saw Sarah's eyes widen her smile, falter her hand, clutch my son's arm like a warning. She knew I was about to ruin her show. Evan looked at me with confusion, perhaps even fear, as though I had become a stranger to him. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. Not anymore. I reached the microphone set up for the toasts and placed my hand on it. My voice came out steady, stronger than I expected. Before this night goes any further, there is something that must be said. The room fell silent. I could feel every eye on me, the weight of their attention pressing down, but for the first time that day, I welcomed it. Because this was my moment. This was the storm I had been preparing for. Sarah's voice rang out shrill and desperate. This isn't the time, really, but I cut her off my words, sharp as steel. You've had your time, now it's mine. I pulled the envelope from my purse, held it up so everyone could see the golden paper gleaming under the lights. Inside this envelope is the truth about what it took to get here, the truth about what has been hidden, the truth about who I really am. Gasps rippled through the room. Guests leaned forward, their curiosity ignited. My son stepped toward me, his hand half raised. Mom, please, not now. His voice cracked a mix of panic and shame, but I looked him in the eye and said, if not now, then when? If not here, then where? If not today, then never. And I will not die with my story untold. I tore the envelope open, unfolded the letter, and let my eyes skim the familiar words. My throat tightened, but my voice rang clear. I began to read my words, slicing through the air like thunder. I told them of the nights I went without food, of the jobs that broke my body, of the sacrifices they had all forgotten. I told them of the little boy I had carried on my back when he was too tired to walk, the little boy who had grown into the man standing beside his bride. And then I told them of the cruelty I had endured in silence, the insults, the erasure, the calculated humiliation. I told them how I had been pushed to the corner, erased from photos, hidden from sight. And finally, I told them the truth that silenced the room completely. Every flower in this room, every plate of food, every string of music you hear tonight, paid for by me, my savings, my sacrifice, my gift. And yet I have been treated not as family, but as a burden. The hall was so silent I could hear the hum of the lights above me. My hands trembled, but I didn't stop. I raised my eyes, meeting the gaze of each guest. I want you all to know that while I may sit here without eyebrows stripped and mocked, I am not broken. Because dignity is not painted on your face, it is carved in your soul. And no one, no daughter-in-law, no even my own son can take that from me. A murmur spread low at first, then louder. I caught Clara's eyes in the crowd, my old friend, the one who had warned me, and saw her nod slowly, her expression fierce with pride. For the first time that night, I did not feel alone. I felt the truth building around me, a force no one could stop. I folded the letter, slid it back into the envelope, and placed it on the table in front of me. This is just the beginning. I said, my voice low but carrying. You wanted me erased, but I am still here. You wanted me silenced, but I will speak. You wanted me invisible, but tonight I will be seen. Sarah's face had gone pale, her lips pressed tight, her eyes darting like a trapped animal. My son stood frozen, his mouth open, his face a portrait of shame and confusion. I almost pitied him. Almost. But then I remembered the silence, the complicity, the way he had looked away when I needed him most. And pity died in me like a snuffed flame. I turned back to the guests, the people who had witnessed my humiliation, and I gave them my final words of the night. This story isn't over. Not by a long shot. And if you think tonight was dramatic, wait until the truth really begins to burn. I stepped away from the microphone the envelope left behind like a ticking bomb and walked back to my seat. My hands still shook, my heart still thundered, but I felt something new coursing through my veins. Not shame, not fear, power. The kind of power that comes when you finally stop begging for respect and start demanding it. The kind of power that signals the storm has arrived. And now I turn to you, listening to me, watching me. You've heard the beginning, you've seen the cruelty, and you've felt the sting of my silence breaking. Tell me, was I right to stand up and speak? Comment number 1, if you believe truth must always be spoken and hit, like if you think I should have kept it buried. Either way, the storm is coming, and when it hits, no one in that hall will ever forget it. The hall buzzed after my speech, but before the whispers could fully catch fire, Sarah grabbed my arm with fingers that felt like talons. Her smile was frozen on her face for the guests, but her nails dug deep into my skin, leaving crescents of pain. She leaned close, her breath sharp with wine, and hissed, "Follow me. Now." Without waiting for my answer, she pulled me through a side door and down a narrow hallway that led toward the service rooms of the venue. The music and chatter muffled behind us until all I could hear was the echo of our footsteps and the hammering of my heart. She slammed the door shut behind us, the heavy sound vibrating through the small storage room we had entered. It smelled of cleaning supplies and dust, a far cry from the roses and champagne in the ballroom. She turned to me, her face contorted, her perfect mask slipping away to reveal the fury beneath. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" She spat, her voice low but venomous. "You humiliated us in front of everyone. You ruined my wedding." I looked at her steady now, my pulse no longer racing but beating with calm determination. "No, Sarah," I said softly, though my voice carried like steel. "You ruined it yourself the moment you decided I was less than human. All I did was tell the truth." Her eyes flashed a dangerous mix of panic and rage. "Truth," she sneered. "You think anyone cares about your sob story? You think a few lines about being a poor struggling mother will change how people see you? Look at you." She jabbed a manicured finger toward my face, the bare skin where my eyebrows had once been. "You're pathetic. A clown. I did you a favor, really. No one even noticed you before. At least now you'll be remembered for something." The words stung, yes, but not like they once would have. Instead, I felt an odd detachment, as if her cruelty were bouncing off a shield I hadn't realized I had built. I took a step closer, closing the space between us until she had to lift her chin to maintain her posture of superiority. "Do you know what I see when I look at you, Sarah?" I asked quietly. "I see a scared little girl hiding behind her makeup, her Botox, her expensive dresses. I see someone who knows deep down that without all of this, I waved a hand toward the opulent hall beyond the door. She is nothing. And that terrifies you, doesn't it?" Her face twisted, but I saw the flicker of truth in her eyes before she masked it again with anger. "Don't you dare talk to me like that," she snapped. "I am the one who will carry this family forward. I am the one who will give Evan a real life. You're just a shadow from the past, and shadows don't belong in the light." I let her words settle heavy and cruel, but then I leaned even closer, lowering my voice to a whisper, sharp as a blade. "Shadows may not belong in the light, but they are proof the light exists. Without me, there would be no Evan, no wedding, no future for you to cling to. You cannot erase me, Sarah. You tried, but you failed. And now the world knows." She trembled, though she tried to disguise it with a laugh, brittle and unconvincing. "The world doesn't care. Guests will forget by tomorrow. You'll crawl back into your little house and no one will think of you again." I shook my head slowly. "You truly don't understand, do you? People don't forget moments like this. They don't forget when the mask slips and the truth comes out. They may laugh at me, yes. They may gossip. But they will remember. And when they look at you, they will remember the cruelty, the arrogance, the way you tried to erase your own mother-in-law on her son's wedding day. That stain doesn't wash out Sarah. Not with all the designer gowns in the world." For a moment, the room was silent except for the sound of her shallow breathing. Her eyes darted desperate, as if searching for a weapon sharper than her words. Finally, she hissed, "You think you've won. You think you can turn my wedding into your stage. You're delusional. Evan will never choose you over me, never." I felt the words hit me like stones, but instead of wounding me, they clarified something. I smiled, not kindly, not warmly, but with the quiet, lethal calm of someone who finally sees the game for what it is. "Sarah," I said, "I don't need Evan to choose me over you. This was never about a competition. This was about truth, and the truth doesn't need permission to exist. It doesn't need anyone to choose it. It simply is, and tonight it has already begun to burn." She stared at me, her lips parted, unable to form a response. I could see it in her eyes, the dawning fear that her carefully constructed world was cracking. She had spent months, maybe years, preparing to erase me, to push me into silence. But now the silence was shattered, and the shards of it cut deeper than any razor could. Finally, she lunged forward, her voice breaking into a whisper that quivered with desperation. "If you ever loved your son, if you ever cared about his happiness, you'll stop this. You'll sit back down, you'll stay quiet, and you'll let us have this day. Otherwise, you'll destroy him along with me." For the first time that night, my anger faltered, and a flicker of sorrow pierced through. Because she wasn't entirely wrong. My son would be caught in the crossfire. He already was. But then I remembered his silence, his complicity, the way he had turned his head away from me again and again. And I realized something painful, but freeing. I couldn't protect him from the truth any longer. He had chosen to ignore it. Now he would have to face it. I straightened my shoulders, my voice calm and final. If Evan is destroyed by the truth, then it is because he built his life on lies. That is not my burden to carry, not anymore. Her mouth opened, then closed. For the first time since I had met her, she looked small. Her shoulders sagged, her eyes darted to the floor, her hands fidgeted with the edge of her robe. And I knew in that moment that I had taken something from her she could never reclaim. I had taken her power. I turned toward the door, my hand on the knob, and looked back one last time. "This isn't over, Sarah. The public part hasn't even begun. If I were you, I would prepare. Because the storm you unleashed when you touched my face will not end until every last secret is dragged into the light." And with that, I walked out, leaving her in the dim storage room, trembling in her silence. For the first time that night, I felt taller, stronger, not because I had won, but because I had stopped losing. The hallway seemed brighter as I returned to the music and the lights of the ballroom. I could feel the energy shifting, the anticipation building. The private confrontation was done. The public reckoning was about to begin. And nothing would ever be the same. When I stepped back into the ballroom, the music and chatter surged around me like a tide, but I felt strangely untouchable. My confrontation with Sarah in the storage room had stripped away the last remnants of fear. She had clawed, she had threatened, but I had looked her in the eye and seen something I never expected: weakness. Now I knew that the time for silence was over. The truth was no longer a secret clutched in my purse. It was a flame, and I was about to set the entire room on fire. The master of ceremonies was calling for another toast, inviting Sarah's father to the microphone. He stood tall, his voice booming with pride, praising his daughter's beauty, her accomplishments, the bright future awaiting her and Evan. The guests applauded politely, glasses lifted high. Then Sarah's mother rose, tears glistening as she spoke of her daughter's strength, her generosity, her grace. Every word felt like a dagger, not because it praised her, but because it erased me further, painting her as a savior while I sat hidden in the corner like a stain. When they finished, the MC smiled and said, "Now, of course, we would love to hear from the groom's side. Who will speak for Evan's family?" There was a pause, a silence so sharp it made my ears ring. All eyes turned to me. My heart thudded. This was it, the moment. I rose slowly, my chair scraping the floor, and carried myself to the microphone. Whispers rippled through the crowd, some curious, some mocking, all expectant. Sarah's face froze in a mask of panic. Evan shifted uncomfortably beside her, his jaw tight. I placed my hands on the podium and let the silence stretch every second, winding the tension tighter. When I spoke, my voice was calm, steady, carrying over the hushed room. You've heard about Sarah's family tonight. You've heard their stories of sacrifice, of love, of support. Now you will hear mine. I opened the golden envelope again, unfolding the letter, but this time I didn't just read. I told the story as if I were standing alone in my kitchen, again my son's childhood flashing before my eyes. I spoke of the nights I worked until my hands bled, the days I starved so he could eat the dreams I buried so he could chase his. I described the sound of his laughter as a boy, how it kept me alive when the bills piled higher than I could pay. I told them how proud I had been to see him grow into a man, how I believed all the pain had been worth it, until I discovered that love could be forgotten, that sacrifice could be erased, that a mother could be treated as a burden instead of the foundation she was. My words fell into the silence like stones into still water rippling outward until I could see tears in the eyes of strangers. Sarah tried to interrupt, stepping forward, but I raised my hand and continued. And yet, despite everything, I still believed this day could be about love. I thought I could swallow my pride for my son's happiness. But then, I paused, my throat tightening. My hand lifted unconsciously to my face, to the bare skin where my eyebrows had been. Gasps spread through the room as people truly looked at me, many for the first time that night. Then I woke this morning to find the final insult, my face, my dignity violated in my sleep. Do you know what it feels like to open your eyes on your son's wedding day and see that someone you trusted has taken a razor to your face? Do you know what it feels like to realize it was no accident, but an act of cruelty designed to erase you, to humiliate you in front of everyone? The silence was suffocating. Sarah's friends exchanged horrified glances, whispers hissing through their painted lips. I saw Sarah's father shift uncomfortably in his seat, his jaw tightening, his eyes flicking toward his daughter. She went pale, her mouth opening to deny it, but before she could speak, I pulled out my phone. I have proof, I said simply, and pressed play. Her voice filled the speakers recorded days earlier, her laughter sharp and cruel. She's so desperate to feel loved that she'll swallow anything we do. By the time the wedding comes, she'll be invisible. Honestly, it's pathetic. The room erupted with shocked gasps. Some guests covered their mouths, others shook their heads in disgust. I let the recording play on her words spilling into the open like poison. Once she's embarrassed, she won't dare show her face. Evan agrees. We're on the same page. When I stopped the recording, the silence returned heavier this time, suffocating. I turned to Sarah, whose face was gray, her lips trembling. "Do you deny this is your voice?" I asked. She stammered. It's out of context." But the damage was done. No one believed her now, not after hearing the venom dripping from her own tongue. I turned back to the crowd, my voice gaining strength. "You see, it wasn't just carelessness. It wasn't nerves. It was a plan to erase me, to humiliate me, to push me out of my son's life. But what Sarah and even my son forgot is this truth cannot be erased. You can shave my eyebrows, you can hide me in the corner, you can cut my name from the invitations, but you cannot erase the truth. And the truth is that without me, this wedding would not even exist. Every flower, every plate, every song paid for by my sacrifice, The guests erupted, voices overlapping, some gasping in sympathy, some muttering in outrage. Sarah's parents looked shattered, her father's hands clenched into fists, her mother pressing a trembling hand to her mouth. My son! Oh, my son! He stood beside her, his face pale, his eyes wide, his mouth working soundlessly as if trying to form words he couldn't bear to speak. Finally, he whispered almost too softly to hear Mom. I didn't know. I looked at him, then my heart torn in two. Part of me wanted to believe him to believe he had been blind, not complicit. But another part remembered his silence, his refusal to see the way he had turned away again and again. "You didn't want to know," I said quietly, my voice trembling, "and that is just as cruel." Then came the final twist, the one no one expected. I reached into my purse and pulled out a folder thick with documents. "Since we are telling truths tonight, let me share one more. This venue," I said, holding up a deed, "belongs to me. Purchased 3 years ago. Leased to the company that operates it. Every chandelier above your head, every brick in these walls mine. So when you laughed at me, when you tried to erase me, remember this, you were sitting in my house." The collective gasp that followed nearly shook the chandeliers themselves. People looked around the ballroom as if seeing it for the first time, their eyes wide with disbelief and awe. I laid the deed on the podium, my hand steady. "You thought I was powerless. But the truth is, I was the foundation beneath your feet all along." Sarah broke then. She screamed, her voice cracking. "She's lying. She's crazy. Don't believe her." She lunged toward me, but Evan caught her arm, holding her back. His face was twisted with horror, not at me, but at her. For the first time, I saw clarity in his eyes. He finally understood. He finally saw who she was, who I was, and what he had allowed. The guests began to murmur louder, some shaking their heads, others standing in silent judgment. The tide had turned, the storm had broken, and Sarah stood drowning in it. I looked out over the crowd, my voice calm now, almost gentle. This was never about revenge. This was about dignity. And tonight dignity has been restored, not because I am rich, not because I own buildings, but because I refused to stay silent when cruelty tried to erase me. That is my victory. I stepped away from the microphone, leaving the letter, the deed, and the silence of truth behind me. The ballroom buzzed with chaos, guests shouting, Sarah sobbing, Evan standing frozen like a man watching his world collapse. But me, for the first time in years, I felt light. I felt free. I had spoken, I had been seen, and I had taken back what was always mine, my dignity. I thought it was over when I stepped away from the microphone, but the truth had only begun to ignite. The ballroom was no longer a wedding hall, it had transformed into a courtroom, and every guest was both jury and witness. Sarah's sobs echoed against the high ceilings. Evan stood, frozen in shock, and I felt 100 eyes drilling into me. Yet for the first time in years, those eyes did not look at me with pity or dismissal. They looked at me with respect, with recognition. But then came the voices, first in whispers, then louder, rising like a storm. I heard her say something like that last week at the spa. One woman muttered to her friend, pointing at Sarah. She bragged about getting rid of her mother-in-law. I thought she was joking. Another guest, a man from Evan's office, stood up, his voice carrying over the chaos. "I've seen the transfers. Herrera Construction didn't make money from contracts. They came from anonymous investors. Investors who, now I realize, were her. Everything she said." He turned to me with wide eyes. It's true. The room erupted. People who once nodded politely to Sarah now turned their backs. Friends who once sipped champagne at her table now pulled away as if she carried a disease. That's how fast reputation dies, like a match touched to dry paper. And I stood at the center, watching it burn. Then came the most unexpected witness of all, Frances, her own mother. She rose slowly, trembling, her hand clutching the edge of the table. Her eyes darted between Sarah and me, shame etched into every wrinkle of her face. "I told her," she whispered, her voice cracking, "I told her not to push it too far. I told her cruelty always comes back." The room hushed instantly. Frances' voice grew stronger, but she didn't listen. She laughed at me. She said humiliation was the only way to make you disappear. She turned toward me, then tears running down her cheeks. I knew she was planning something, but I didn't know she'd do this. I didn't know she'd go so far. Gasps filled the air again. Sarah's own mother had spoken against her, and suddenly her mask crumbled completely. She screamed, lunging toward Frances, but Evan pulled her back, his face filled with disgust. "Enough, Sarah!" he shouted, his voice breaking the room like a whip. "Enough lies, enough cruelty, I can't defend you anymore." For the first time, his voice carried the weight of a man who realized the damage he had allowed. And yet I couldn't find comfort in it. His words came too late to erase the years of silence, too late to undo the cruelty that had already scarred me. The fire spread beyond family. Guests pulled out their phones, recording, streaming live, their whispers turning into commentary for an invisible audience online. Within minutes, I knew this would no longer be a private humiliation or redemption. This was public. This was viral. And strangely, I welcomed it. Not because I craved spectacle, but because silence had been my prison for too long. If my story had to be told, let it be told everywhere. One of Evan's former employees, a young man named David, stood from the back of the room. His voice shook, but his conviction didn't. I left Herrera Construction because I knew something was wrong. Deadlines missed money that didn't add up, projects that only survived because cash appeared from nowhere. I thought Evan was laundering or cutting deals. I never imagined it was his mother's money. Now I see the truth. He took credit for everything you built, his eyes locked on mine. "You deserve better than this, ma'am. Much better." The room roared again, judgment hammering Sarah and Evan from every corner. I could see it in their eyes, the realization that their kingdom wasn't just crumbling, it was collapsing in a public firestorm. I turned back to the guests, then my voice steady, deliberate, because I wanted this moment to be remembered, not as a scandal, but as a warning. You've all seen it with your own eyes tonight. You've heard the words, you've seen the proof, you've witnessed the cruelty. Tell me how many of you have ever dismissed an older woman as invisible? How many of you have ever decided her voice didn't matter? Her presence was expendable? How many of you have seen your own mothers, your own grandmothers treated as burdens instead of the pillars they are? I let the silence grow heavy again, then asked, "If you believe what was done to me was wrong, comment 1. If you believe silence is just as cruel as action, then like this story so the world knows, because I cannot fight this alone. No one can." That was the moment the energy shifted. This was no longer just my fight. It was bigger. I saw guests nodding, their faces grim. Some whispered, "She's right." Others clapped softly, then louder, until applause broke like thunder across the hall. They weren't clapping for me, not really. They were clapping for the truth. Sarah collapsed into her chair, mascara streaking down her cheeks, her hands covering her face as if she could hide from the world's eyes. Evan stood stiff, broken, realizing his silence had destroyed not just his marriage, but his reputation, his company, his name. The witnesses had spoken and the fire had spread beyond anything they could contain. I stepped away, then my confession, complete, my dignity, restored not by revenge, but by the chorus of voices that had risen to join mine. For years they had mocked me for being silent, invisible, small. Tonight I had shown them that even the smallest flame once lit could consume an empire of lies. The wedding never finished. The orchestra packed their instruments in silence. Waiters cleared untouched plates, and the grand ballroom emptied like a sinking ship. Guests filed out in whispers, their dresses and suits brushing against each other as if the silence itself were contagious. Sarah sat slumped in her chair, her face streaked with makeup, her manicured hands trembling as if clinging to the last threads of control. Evan hovered beside her, pale and hollow, but he didn't touch her. Not once. He couldn't. I left before the last candle was extinguished. I didn't stay to watch them unravel because the truth was already doing what I never could, dismantling their empire brick by brick. But what happened after that night spread faster than wildfire. Within days, clips of my speech and Sarah's recorded cruelty circulated online. Mother humiliated on son's wedding day fights back became a headline. Then another invisible woman reveals she owns it all. The story wasn't just gossip, it became a symbol, a mirror people couldn't look away from. The fallout was merciless. Sarah's carefully curated image of elegance and power shattered overnight. Her friends from the tennis club stopped answering her calls. The spa where she spent her mornings revoked her membership, whispering about how clients didn't want that kind of scandal near them. Boutiques that once opened their doors early for her locked them instead. In a matter of days, she went from center of attention to outcast her name, spoken only in pity or disgust. Her parents didn't fare better. Edward's smug pride turned into humiliation when he was asked to resign from the country club's board. Frances could no longer walk into the supermarket without whispers following her through the aisles. The family that once bathed in reflected glory now wore the mark of disgrace. Evan's collapse was slower, more public, and perhaps more painful. Within a week, investors pulled out of Herrera Construction. Contracts froze, projects stalled, workers left unpaid. News outlets printed the truth the company had never been Evan's success story. It had been propped up by silent support money he had never earned. His business partner Daniel fled, leaving Evan to face the questions alone. Lawsuits soon followed, clients demanding refunds, creditors calling in debts. He tried to salvage it, but the illusion was gone. By the end of the month, Herrera Construction declared bankruptcy. He lost the mansion first. Foreclosure notices pinned to the gate like scarlet letters, neighbors whispering as the once proud family packed boxes into rented trucks. The luxury cars disappeared one by one, repossessed under the watch of strangers. Sarah left him not long after vanishing with what little jewelry she could carry. She blamed him for everything just as he blamed me. But the truth was their empire had been rotting long before I lit the match. And me. My life changed in ways I never imagined. The woman who had once been invisible, tolerated at the edge of family photos, suddenly found herself approached by strangers who whispered, "I saw your story. Thank you." Letters arrived, handwritten, emailed, messaged on social media. Older women, daughters, even sons who said, "Your story is mine." I thought I was alone. Some cried, some shouted, some simply thanked me for speaking out when they couldn't. But not all reactions were kind. Some called me cruel. They said I should have stayed silent for the sake of family, that dignity didn't require destruction. They accused me of relishing revenge. At first those words stung, but then I realized they came from fear. Fear of facing the truth in their own homes. Fear of admitting how easy it is to erase a mother once she is no longer useful. I didn't answer them because the truth doesn't beg for approval. It stands with or without applause. Sarah tried to recover her image. She gave an interview, her voice trembling, as she said, "I only wanted what was best for our family. Things were taken out of context, but the internet is merciless." The recording of her laughter, her words about shaving my eyebrows played side by side with her denial. Out of context, people mocked. How do you take cruelty out of context? The video was shared, parodied, memed. Sarah became not a socialite, but a cautionary tale. Evan disappeared for a while, hiding in a rented apartment in a middle-class neighborhood where no one cared about his last name. I heard he tried working at smaller firms, but no one wanted to touch his name. Every resume he sent out was like an open wound. "Isn't that the man whose mother exposed him?" employers whispered. His pride, once taller than the mansion he flaunted, had crumbled into dust. But I didn't celebrate his fall. Strange as it sounds, watching him lose everything was not sweet. It was bitter. Bitter because he was still my son. Bitter because I had given him love, sacrifice, and a chance at dignity, and he had traded it all for a lie. Every headline about his collapse was another cut across the memory of the boy who once held my hand, the boy who once whispered, "I love you, Mom, before bed." That boy was gone, and no amount of truth could bring him back. Yet amidst the wreckage, I found clarity. The silence that had once been my prison became my freedom. I no longer needed to hide in a modest house, no longer needed to shrink so others could shine. I walked taller. I spoke louder. I no longer apologized for existing, and that more than any fortune was the true aftermath of my storm. The legal system came next. Lawyers contacted me offering to pursue charges of fraud, forgery, even elder abuse. The forged signatures, the false medical reports, the conspiracy to declare me incompetent, every detail had been captured, every proof ready to burn them in court. But I surprised them all. I refused, not because they didn't deserve punishment, but because punishment was already happening. Public disgrace is a prison with no bars. Bankruptcy is a sentence harsher than any judge could give. And guilt, the kind that creeps into the bones at night, is a punishment only they can serve. Instead, I used my voice for others. The foundation I began grew quickly, fueled by donations from strangers who said, "Make sure no one else is silenced." We helped women take back pensions stolen by their children, stopped fraud hidden under the mask of family care, rebuilt dignity where it had been stripped away. Each case was a reminder my story was not unique. It was universal. One evening, as I sat on the balcony of my true home, the penthouse they never knew about, I looked out at the city lights and thought about dignity. How fragile it seems, how easily erased, and yet how resilient. They shaved my eyebrows, but they couldn't shave my soul. They tried to erase me, but in doing so, they wrote me larger than I ever imagined. That is the paradox of cruelty. It digs graves for others, but falls into them itself. The aftermath was not revenge. It was revelation. Sarah lost her crown, Evan lost his empire, and I finally found my voice. It has been months since that night, yet I can still hear the sound of the ballroom going silent when the truth broke free. The memory of Sarah's trembling, Evan's hollow stare, the collective gasp of witnesses, it all replays in my mind like an old film reel. But I no longer watch it with pain. I watch it with clarity, with the kind of strength that comes only after walking through fire and realizing you did not burn, you forged. In the quiet mornings now, I sit by the window of my penthouse, the one they never knew about, and I sip coffee that tastes of freedom. The city sprawls beneath me, alive, restless, but I am no longer lost in it. I am part of it. I walk its streets not as a shadow, not as a burden, but as a woman reborn. There are still scars. Sometimes I catch myself in the mirror, my bare eyebrows reminding me of that morning when humiliation tried to strip me of dignity. But now when I trace the smooth skin with my fingertips, I do not feel shame. I feel victory. Because those scars tell the story of a woman who refused to be erased. They remind me every day that cruelty can cut, but it cannot define. My life has filled with new voices, new faces. Women who once whispered their pain in secret now speak boldly in the halls of my foundation. They bring their stories of pensions stolen, of wills rewritten, of sons and daughters who treated them as shadows. And we fight together. We fight with lawyers, with truth, with solidarity. For every woman who thought she had no power, there is now proof that she can stand. And I stand with them, not as a savior, not as a millionaire, but as a survivor. The title I am proudest of is not owner or founder. It is mother who refused to disappear. Evan calls sometimes. His voice is softer now, stripped of arrogance, weighed down by consequence. He says he wants forgiveness. He wants a chance to rebuild. And I listen. Because forgiveness, I have learned, is not for them. It is for us. Forgiveness frees me from chains of anger, but trust is another story. Trust is rebuilt with actions brick by brick over years. Maybe he will rebuild it. Maybe he won't. That choice is his, not mine. Sarah has vanished from the public eye. Her name surfaces occasionally whispered in gossipy corners of the city. But she is no longer power, no longer threat. She is only caution, a reminder of what happens when cruelty becomes arrogance. And I no longer think of her with anger. I think of her with pity, because the greatest punishment is to live knowing the mask you wore has been shattered and everyone saw what lay beneath. People often ask me now, what is the greatest lesson you learned? And I answer with this: dignity is not given, it is claimed. Families may forget, children may betray, but dignity is the one inheritance we must protect ourselves. It is never too late. Not at 50, not at 64, not at 75. The world may try to tell us that our story is over, but the pen has always been in our hand. Sometimes, at the end of the day, I close my eyes and return to that moment at the microphone, my voice steady, my heart pounding the room, hanging on every word, and I realize that was the moment I stopped being invisible. That was the moment I rewrote my story. And now I want to ask you, yes, you who are listening to my confession right now, how many times have you seen cruelty dismissed as a joke? How many times have you watched a parent, a grandparent, a neighbor treated as less because of their age? How many times have you stayed silent thinking it was not your place? If you believe silence is dangerous, if you believe dignity must be defended no matter the cost, then comment one below. And if you believe more people must hear this story, then press like, so it spreads. Because every time you share, every time you speak, you make it harder for cruelty to hide. I do not need applause. I do not need pity. All I ask is this: do not wait until you are erased to fight for your place. Do not wait until humiliation comes to claim your voice. Claim it now. Speak it now. Live it now. Because in the end, the sweetest revenge is not in watching others fall. It is in standing tall yourself, unbroken, undeniable, and free. That is what I found in the aftermath of betrayal. That is what I want you to carry from my story. The question is, will you stay silent or will you speak? Will you let dignity fade or will you defend it, yours and that of those who came before you? I have answered my question, and now it is your turn.